I'd like to welcome Huayi for joining me today. He's been on many of our panels in the past, if you aren't aware, but he provides us with incredible insight to the sell side.
Thank you very much.
Of course, to the sell side. And what we really want to kind of jump into is that first question, which is people are actually interested in incorporating a lot of their machine readable news. So with that, could you share a little bit more about what the sell side's doing that the buy side could actually learn from? And then we can dig a little deeper as to how you're going about doing that and some use cases.
Absolutely. So again, I'm from a sell-side firm. So the reason we use machine-readable news is not only to predict which stock to pick. In fact, we do not predict which stock to pick, but rather to predict the next 5 minutes or the next 10 minutes on how the stock market is going to react. So for example, if you on the buy side have an order sending to us on the sell side, we have to help you execute the order. So how do we know which level on the depths do we park the order? Are we going to wait another 5 minutes to send the order? Will that get you a better price as our clients? Or shall we just execute now to capture the arrival price and meet the benchmark? So that's constantly the struggles we have on the sell side. And obviously, we have quants looking at all kinds of data, try to create models to predict for the next 5 to 10 minutes, or even an hour, depending on the time horizon of the order. But we never have enough data. So just by looking at market data, we can generate models that may be suitable for this week, or maybe suitable for a MSCI rebalance day, or maybe suitable for Japan SQ day, but it may not be suitable for tomorrow. Let's say if a company has an announcement, or if there's any negative news for not only the firm, but even for the country. For example, there's a classic stock in Hong Kong that was placed on the US sanction list. I'm not going to name the company. A couple weeks ago, a week ago, and a lot of people started selling it, so the price changed a lot. But that's very, very difficult to predict before the sanction list was published. And every company was dealing it very differently, consulting their US lawyers on what to do, et cetera, et cetera. But if we have machine-readable news, which will start to get a lot of feeds into our algos, to start to say, this stock is very interesting, because a lot of people was looking at the news, a lot of events was published, and the events are either positive or negative, then the machines can start to decide, maybe I should start to sell now, rather than waiting for the clients until the end of the day and possibly getting a worse price.
So that's interesting. How do you determine whether or not news is worthy, right? What is the newsworthiness? How do you determine between positive and negative news? What is your firm doing in regards to that?
Very good. So again, every news can be newsworthy. So if we are listening to news, if Thomson Reuters publish a news, Bloomberg publish a news, CNN publish a news, everybody start to publish on the same topic, which means the news is important. It doesn't matter if it's newsworthy or if it's positive or negative. At least it's very important, because all the major media players are publishing that news. But only if a local media is publishing the news, no international medias are picking that up, which could potentially mean it's affecting a small region only. And it might still be important for those symbols, for those stocks, but it may not be impacting most of our clients because it's not completely newsworthy. On determining is it positive or is it negative, you have to look at the past trend of market data matching up with the news. So if certain news start to pop up, or if certain tags start to pop up along with the market data changes, then quants still exist, by the way. They can start to look at the correlations between news versus the importance of news versus the actual movement in the stock market, or potentially the stock prices. Then certain models can be applied using news as an additional input resource rather than using only market data.
Thank you. So I know at Thomson Reuters we offer a suite of solutions for machine readable news, from raw data to analytics. And when you talk about positive and negative news, obviously that's the analytics that is being derived on this raw data that we provide. So in your case, the one thing that we haven't actually captured yet is fake news, right? Which is a term that has been coined over the past couple years when a certain president has come into term. So what is your firm doing in regards to fake news and identifying that?
So again, we're looking at the next 5 to 10 minutes. So the news is a real news or is a fake news, it matters very little to us. Because fake news actually creates more market movement rather than the real news. And what we do as a sell side is we protect the clients. So if you're the buy side, you send orders to us, and if we don't capture that market movement, then the sell side has done something wrong. So the fake news, what we have determined through past research is if you start to see a lot of Twitter messages or even Facebook messages or local forum messages, it will create a relatively major spike in the stock market. It has a very big impact, but there may be a reversion later once the news has been identified as fake news. But for a sell-side firm, again, our time horizon is very, very short. We don't really care if the news is real or fake because we're not doing investments. We're helping you to execute. So on the fake news side, I know Thomson Reuters does not deliver fake news, which has been one of the biggest headache for us. What we need to look at is not only Twitter and Facebook, which is quite North European as well as North American centric. We also have to look at the news or the forum post within the local countries, such as Hong Kong, or for example, like Japan. Japan has a lot of local news as well. But that's one of the biggest headache we've had in the past, which is we don't have a consolidated source for all the information that's coming from every single region with all the inputs and outputs.
So last week when we were speaking, we touched on crowdsourcing. Could you actually share a little bit more as to what your firm has found out in regards to what crowdsourcing is for certain type of news on different forums or social media platforms? Because I think that's a really interesting step into the future of how we're actually aggregating this type of news when you talk about consolidating.
Absolutely. So again, crowdsourcing is basically getting news stories from the crowd. So if you look at Twitter is a self-published news source. And it depends on the publisher. And you can start to calculate a lot of the trust scores, who's associated, who's following the publisher, and you can start to assign weights to their news. But again, I have to repeat, Twitter is very North American centric. So if you start to use Twitters to follow certain stocks, you will see a lot of information being published for the US stocks or for the European stocks, but very little for the Chinese, for the Hong Kong, for the local domestic stocks that we live in APAC. We have started engaging a couple other companies. Sorry, unfortunately not Thomson Reuters in this front. They utilize Facebook and Twitter as well as calculating the publisher's trustworthiness and start to calculate if this is positive, negative, how it's going to impact the market. And the feed is relatively real time. And that has given us an extra edge on analyzing exactly what's going on in the market. As well as you can look at a country level. So if you're following President Trump, although most of the news stories are untrustworthy, but it creates an impact. So whatever he says, it will start to create impact on the relevant countries that he is focusing on or the relevant industries that he has focused on. So by looking at that, we can protect our clients from the potential impact by delivering an automated solution.
Thank you. So with that, what are some of the challenges that you guys are facing today? And what are some advantages that you've actually learned from your challenges that the buy side could actually take back with them?
So most of the challenges are getting the raw data is easy. So you can always go to a source, buy the raw data, get a feed, or even subscribe for an RSS feed. You can get tons of data into your news source. But on the buy side, again, I haven't worked for a buy side. I know you guys are much longer term than just 5 to 10 minutes. I know you guys are looking at value investing. So parsing that specific text is going to be a problem, because a lot of the news, although they're in English, they might be in different dialects. And if you trust the publisher's tags, the hashtags, it may not be correct. And sometimes the publisher hashtag a different symbol than the one you actually want to focus on. So that creates a lot of confusions. If you start to only look at Twitters, you have to look at exactly which area Twitter supports very well. Or if you look at Yahoo Japan, which is one of the main news source in Yahoo, or the discuss.com.Hong Kong, which is a huge list of discussions that are happening in Hong Kong. Even if you look at Hong Kong Golden, I know a lot of people is going to laugh at this, but Hong Kong Golden is where all the young people actually goes. And that actually does create an impact on the market as well. So if you start looking at Taiwan, Taiwan has their own forums. Again, if you parse all those data by yourself, it's going to create a huge, huge problem, because most of the data are not English, or their hashtag is completely wrong. And that's why we collaborate with Thomson Reuters. And potentially one day, they can provide us information in an understandable, machine-readable, and trusted or untrusted way. At least we get the information.
That's great. I love that you touched on hashtags. Hashtags, and I guess in our industry, we like to call them metadata as well, information on unstructured content. And I think that was something that you were mentioning in regards to how we're helping you out and connecting the data. So I do want to make a quick note, which I didn't make in the beginning. We want this session to be interactive, so please submit your questions. We're already halfway through this session. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, both either myself or Huayi, please do submit them now, and they will be coming up on the slides. We'll continue our conversation until we see some questions come up. So Huayi, what are some of use cases that you guys are working on today that you could potentially share with us?
Yeah, so again, during the sell-side summit, what we mentioned is we're using AI to parse market data and predict and create better models for the prediction of the next 5 to 10 minutes VWAP curve. That has proven to be very useful. So we're starting to incorporate machine-readable news into the AI models and see if that actually helps us to predict the near-term future better. We have done a lot of research, we have done a lot of data source analyzing, but it's not going into production yet, simply because we do not have a pulse on exactly which market data source shall we be using and what kind of symbols, what kind of sectors we should be focusing on. For sell side, obviously we're heavily regulated. Everything needs to be explainable. We cannot just magically randomly say, here's a piece of AI that does big data, and then the regulator approves. It just doesn't work that way. So we're still doing a lot of research, analysis, and trying to find out how to improve our VWAP curve predictions, as well as how to enhance our arrival algo performances by analyzing what is the time horizon and predicting for the future.
So speaking of the future, where do you think the future of machine-readable news will head towards?
Well, I think Thomson Reuters has a great system that you use internally, which unfortunately I haven't been able to touch yet, by your news reporters. And that could potentially be the future. You're analyzing Twitters, you're analyzing a lot of information to give your news reporters a heads up on potentially reporting on the news. But again, that's not 100% trusted news, right? So that could potentially include fake news, where your news reporters will go out and validate the stories. So I really, in the immediate future, I really want to get my hands on that.
So what he's referencing is what our Reuters journalists actually use in-house when they're validating stories via Twitter. We have an artificial intelligence tool that they use called Tracer, which will cluster and identify whether or not an individual is a worthy individual or even a legitimate individual versus a robot. It will cluster news that's worthy versus not worthy, so you can look whether or not it's fake or real, in simpler terms. And unfortunately, it's only available to our Reuters journalists today. But I've sent him a lot of information on it just to kind of
It's a teaser, right?
Yeah, it's a teaser. But it definitely is, something that we are working on because our journalists need to know what's happening immediately, and this is a tool that allows them to capture that in a much more faster way.
Absolutely.
So, do we have any questions? Do you see potential for machine readable news to be used with horizons of days and weeks?
I say absolutely, but you have to do it very differently from how we do it. On the sales side, we don't really care about the content of the news story. We don't have the time nor the technology to read the contents. What we do care about is the volume of news relating to certain symbols. And then we start to look at, for example, hashtags or the sentiment scores that Reuters or other providers will assign to it, then we can quickly decide. But if you're looking at to be useful for the horizon of days and weeks, I strongly suggest you actually do some parsing on the news story and try to incorporate and link the stories up. Because you cannot only look at one news story and say this is a 100% independent event. Most of the events are interlinked. So there will be interlinked stories or even stories that link to the past, potentially link to the future, and you have to create a whole spectrum of information before you can start to decide, is this useful for days, weeks, or even months going forward? That's exactly what research analysts do in the past. But from machine-readable news, if you have the right AI to analyze that, I'm 100% sure it's doable. But are we there yet? Most likely no.
Great. Second question. When you first started using machine-readable news, how much time was required in your research process before you obtained value?
Oh, it was very quick. It was almost like for the whole afternoon, we started to decide, do we want to focus on this symbol or not? But the results was completely disappointing. We started, again, one of the very simple factor is we started to analyze the volume of news related to one symbol. And we don't care if it's positive or negative. We just care about volume. Because the volume of news will correlate to the volume of the stock being traded on the market. And in fact, for a sell side algo, we don't necessarily care about the price going up or down because we don't carry the burden of the investment correctness or not. You do. What we do is we predict the volume and we use the volume to see how that volume will change compared to the historical volume. And we start to participate either on the passive side or we go aggressive and try to capture the volume. So the volume of news, we can easily analyze that by writing a couple of simple scripts and just say this hashtag or this keyword appears so many times and that relates to this symbol and that will positively impact my VWAP curve going forward. So in fact, for us, I mean, the result was almost immediate. But how to fine-tune that result actually takes years. And in fact, we're not in production yet. We're still not in production.
Great. I don't know how many times you said you don't care about the news, but you care about the volume. I find that really interesting because people actually, when we're looking at just the raw data itself, they want to know what is embedded within a full story that is being released. Are there keywords that you're picking up? Are those keywords stronger or weaker than the story itself? So let's move on to the third question here. How does a translate to English technique work for analyzing news with machine learning compared to machine learning in the native language? Ooh, that's a tough one. We were
I
just
think
talking about
we discussed
this.
that
Yes.
offline as well. So even if you use the state-of-the-art Google Translate, which has been in development for more than 15 years, with top scientists behind it, which started generating its own intermediate language by itself, it's still not perfect. I go to Japan very frequently, so I use Google Translate all the time. Take photos of things, immediately gets translated, and it's still completely, I still cannot understand what's happening. I can understand a little bit now, but most of it cannot be trusted. So again, if you're using translate to English techniques for a native language, I would say you can only pick up keywords. And you have to focus on those keywords. That's the max you can do. Or even company names. I'm pretty sure you can pick up company names, keywords. But if you want to do a little bit intelligent by parsing the semantic and fully understanding the stories and even connecting this sentence with the next sentence or stories between stories, that's very difficult to do with a machine learning technique without the involvement of Google, Baidu, or the large tech firms. Those are still possible, but it could be years in the future.
I think we also touched on this at our Future Finance event earlier in February, which is how do you actually extract value from historical data sets, right? Especially if you want to think futuristically, you have to move immediately. And so that was something we talked about when we were talking about AI and the moves of machine learning and cognitive learning. Fourth question that we have with 2 minutes to go. Do you need a knowledge graph to be able to understand the impact of certain news on the related companies? If so, what's your solution or plan?
So from a knowledge graph perspective, we definitely do need a knowledge graph because these are all historical data. So you're not only looking at the news that's happening today, you're also looking at the historical information. For the knowledge graph, it's managed by our own recurrent neural network, which is being trained continuously on certain things, on certain information that we extract from the news. Again, keywords, the volume of information, the number of articles that we actually received. For example, for HSBC, it may get news like every single day. But for a lesser known company, say in China, some small province, it might only get a news once a quarter. And so what is the right behavior? I mean, is this within the norm, or should I start to look at the volume? Again, I love the volume of news because that is the simplest factor you can use with machine readable news. But by analyzing those patterns, you can almost generate a VWAP curve for the volume of news and start to compare that with the actual trading volume in the market and start to make some correlations, start to predict for the future.
Great. I think we are ending on time. If there are any other questions in the crowd, please feel free to raise your hand or submit them. But other than that, I would like to give a big thank you to Huayi for joining us today at this Fireside Chat.
Thank you. Thank you very much.